Hey, welcome everybody to the latest episode of Track Records, which I believe is episode 10. Is that correct, Barry?
Nine.
Nine, episode nine. Sorry,
Nine.
nine. I've been having a little trouble with the numbering, but good in English, bad in math. But okay, this is episode number nine. Your hosts Kenny and Barry. And last time we were talking about the Ramones, I believe, and their first album. Is that
Mm-mm.
correct?
No, we had moved past that.
Okay, I do.
We were actually still talking about artists who either had never put out a shitty record or had put out a string of six really good records in a row, and it we were cut off when we were talking about David Bowie.
Right. And the amazing run he had, which I didn't even realize. I mean, I knew, generally, but when we really stepped back and went record by record, I was stunned how many records and how long the run was. Because I would have said it's the Stones, it's, the Beatles, it's Dylan or whatever. Man, I would say now, hands down, it's Bowie.
Yeah, I agree. And we where we left off, we had just gotten to where it all went to hell in a handbasket, which was Let's Dance.
And I'm not a fan of Let's Dance, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't, it like the albums after that are really where like it just goes off a cliff. So um, Stevie Ray's guitar playing saves Let's Dance to a bit. I do want to just sort of step away just for a second, revisit the Ramones first record, then get right back to where we were, because I
Okay.
re-listened to it as I often re-listen to stuff after we've talked about it, and I think the first four songs are just like amazing, and they just like it opens with Blitzkrieg Bop, which is just such a great way to open an album, and like it just gets you going. And I think they were crucial in terms of where music was at the time, in terms of they were a necessary injection of stripped down, high motor, small production music, because I think rock had gotten really bloated at that time. So I think they were huge. But I don't think the album as a whole, after those first four songs, there's a couple other good ones, but for the most part, it's like you were talking about as one of the great albums of all time. And you compare that to something like Beggar's Banquet or Revolver, then I don't think it's even close. As much as I do like it, okay, and again, I think they were critical. That album was recorded in 7 days, which is pretty funny when you compare it to like someone like Springsteen taking like 2 years to record an album. So
And it sounds like it was recorded in about 7 minutes.
yes,
Um, so when it's apples and oranges comparing early Ramones record to something by the Stones or the Who or some of these other ones that are generally regarded as either the best artists or best records of all time. Um, I think you have to factor in for the Ramones record, the first Ramones record, how unusual it was, especially in the context of the times. It just sounded so bizarre compared to everything else that was coming out as a rock record at that time. And for me, that factors into its
okay,
greatness,
that's
the
fair enough.
originality of it.
But if you're gonna go apples to apples, let's compare it to the first record by the Clash or the first record by X. Would you say that's apples to apples?
Yeah, I would. And I would say it stacks up well against those records. I like
And
the first Clash record more than the first Ramones record,
okay,
but I still think the first Ramones record is so I don't know if revolutionary is
yeah,
the
no,
right word,
groundbreaking,
but
yeah, no,
groundbreaking, yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
No, and again, if you're going to give it points for that, then it gets major points. If you're looking at just the songs, I don't think it's as strong. But I agree that especially the time they were doing, and Joey's talked about like the music in New York at the time. Everyone's trying to be the Dolls, and I love the New York Dolls. And that really comes out of the Stones, sort of music, and the Ramones were so different. So
So how can you not love the lyrics, beat on the brat with a baseball bat? You're saying the lyrics aren't that great?
and that's
What
what I'm
the
saying.
hell is
When
wrong
you
with you?
when you compare that to Sympathy for the Devil, I just don't think it's as strong. And so, as a lyrics guy, but again, I love their Ramones. Saw them two or three times back in the day. Man, they played loud. I was at a club one time, and I was unfortunately standing next to one of the speakers, and I remember my pants were like the noise from the speaker was making my pants move. Like it was like it was that strong.
What
Um,
era did you see them?
so I saw them. This would have been the '80s. So
Do you
um,
know which record?
it would
It,
it end of the century maybe. When did that come out? 1980.
that was 80. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, and I remember being at the Metro Club in Boston one time when all of a sudden I'm just standing there watching them and like loving the show, and the bouncers come flying across the floor, grab a guy, uh, send him flying. Like they kick open the door and they chuck him out the door and close the door. And this door was like the side door that goes to a hill that goes down to the highway. Now there's a fence, so you wouldn't like fall onto the highway, but the guy must have like rolled down the hill and hit the fence and then had to try to like figure out his way to get back from there. So that was often what shows in Boston were like. So but yeah, so I saw them right around 1980. Which is also around when I first saw the Clash. And so I used to go to shows all the time. That was one of the great things about living in Boston and going to school at Boston University is like I could just walk to shows or take the subway, or like it was really easy to go and see live music.
Sorry about that. I would
Yeah,
have killed to live in a metropolitan area growing up for that reason. Growing up where I did, my buddies who were also really into music, anytime we would want to see a show, we'd have to go 250 miles. So that was a big roadblock to seeing a lot of shows. Once we got old enough, we would drive up to Seattle to see stuff, but like the Ramones, for example, I saw them in '83 at a
and
place called the Eagles Hippodrome in Seattle. And that was after, the Subterranean Jungle record. And they had a different drummer. Marky had quit for a while. And,
right.
but yeah, I'm so envious that you had such a great opportunity to see so many great shows when you're growing up. I would
And,
have killed for that.
and the local music scene in Boston was fantastic with bands like Mission of Burma, Human Sexual Response, Robin Lynn, the Chartbusters, the Liars. So it was just amazing. And I know me, and I wouldn't have done what you did. I'm impressed the trips you guys made to Seattle because
We had to.
I would have been like, fuck it. Also, we were often like, messed up at shows and all, so I wouldn't have wanted to be on the road. And the funny thing is, I didn't even get my driver's license till I was 20 because in Boston, I just took
Didn't.
the streetcar everywhere, the subway everywhere. So,
Yeah.
or I had
And
friends who drove. So,
to your point about driving, we were still pretty young. Like I'm 16, 17 at that time, and so are my buddies, maybe a year older. So we weren't doing a lot of partying
got
anyway.
it. Yeah,
And when we would drive up to Seattle, it would be a big event, and we'd stay up there a couple days, go to record stores,
got it. Yeah.
things like that. All these things that, being the music fanatics that we were, we couldn't really do in Walla Walla. So
And
we had to go to
music
Seattle for that.
record shopping in Boston was awesome. We had
Oh, I'm
like
sure.
several used record stores, and some of my friends and I would either take the subway or we'd just walk. Boston's a great walking city, and we just
Mhm.
walk from Boston to Cambridge and hit every used record store along the way. And so that I definitely I was lucky to grow up in Boston, and I really enjoyed that, except for winter. So. But it's also interesting. So I'm looking at the shirt you're wearing, which is something you frequently wear, and I'm looking at the shirt I'm wearing. Okay, which just not so much this shirt, but just the difference. You were definitely born to be a drummer. You're very low key.
Huh.
You're not brash.
Interesting. And
So
that's your takeaway from my stellar garb
yes,
that I'm wearing.
and your demeanor. Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah. Um, did you ever try any other instrument?
No,
Okay. So, there
no,
you go.
definitely not. Um, so uh, I think there's so much to unwrap around bands who've either never put out a poor record or really poor record, or have at least put out a great run of records, like
Sure.
6 records long.
Yep.
A couple that I think we missed, or at least that I missed, around bands who during the entire career didn't put out a terrible record. I think CCR, Credence, is one of those.
How many albums did they put out? I didn't think there was
I
that
think
many.
six,
Okay.
six or seven, and the last one Mardi Gras was the name of it. And at that point, they were a trio. Tom Fogerty had quit the band just before that. And John Fogerty allowed the bassist and the drummer to contribute songs to the record, whereas that wasn't the case with all their other records. So they wrote and sang about two-thirds of the record, and they're not up to the standard of Fogerty songs, but they're okay. They're okay. But the Fogerty songs on that record are so strong. Someday Never Comes, Sweet Hitchhiker, um, that the record overall is still a really good record, even though it was their swan song and it was a bit of a last gasp record.
And I
Uh,
don't know that album that well. I certainly know the songs you just mentioned, and it is amazing about Fogerty. Just like I was surprised when we looked at Bowie, like all the how many albums he had and how many in a row. With Fogerty, it's just amazing how many songs hit songs he wrote. And also, it's ironic that he never hit number one.
yeah, number two was the
Yeah,
closest they got,
and
but
he hit number two a few times.
a
So
lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
They were the top selling band on the planet there for a while. Even were outselling the Beatles in the 68 to 69 sweet spot. They'd put out three or four records within the space of about 16 months. And but anyway, my point being that they didn't ever put out a really crappy record. Their first record is not their greatest by any means. It's just the self-titled one, but still has some really great songs on it, and I would still consider it a really strong record.
the funny thing about them is when you compare them to the Stones, the Beatles, the Who, Zeppelin, whatever. Not talking musically, just talking. Are you familiar with the phrase Q factor?
Yeah, of
Like
course.
they just wouldn't have a high Q factor. Like you just don't think of them. Like and you didn't even think of them then. It's
You
just
were
sort of funny for as successful and as great as they were.
speaking of low key. You don't get more low key and down to earth than Credence.
Yeah,
Those guys. That's one of the things that I liked and still do like so much about them is that they were seemingly humble. They weren't playing the rock star trip at all, as evidenced by that movie that's on Netflix right now. It's the Royal Albert Hall
yep.
concert movie, which is great, by the way. But there's also offstage stuff throughout that, and they just come across as like the most normal, down to earth dudes. And
It,
here they are, like the biggest rock band on the
that's
planet at the
that's the
time.
funny thing. It's just so different from the Stones, so different from the Who. You know, you wouldn't see them driving their car in a swimming pool. You wouldn't see them being banned from the Holiday Inn. you
You,
know,
you did not see Stu Cook nodding out on heroin.
yeah, or groupies throwing themselves at them. So
Even though they deserved it
yeah,
because they were so good during their peak.
yeah.
Um, Another one who I think we missed, or at least I missed, and this is an artist who has been around forever and started putting out records in the early 70s all the way up until just a few years ago. And so that probably encompasses 15 to 20 records. Tom Waits,
Uh,
in my opinion, has never put out a bad record or even close to bad.
and I certainly don't know all of his records, but every record I've listened to, I've really like. So Closing Time, Swordfish and Trombones. So many of his albums are so good. So I can't speak to that because again I haven't heard all of them by any means, but I would believe that. And he's a guy. I saw him in concert, and one of the things I remember was at the Orpheum in Boston, and for whatever reason, I guess there were a lot of people who were just like didn't shower. It was the smelliest concert. You talk about the loudest concert, you talk about the most annoying concert, the greatest concert. This was the smelliest concert I ever went to, and I don't know why, but he was great, and I was like, I'm dying here. Like, can I stay to the end?
That's weird.
It was totally weird. I have no explanation for it, but I will never forget it to this day. It was like the worst scratch and sniff thing I've ever experienced, and that includes polyester. But he was fantastic, and he's great, and he's an amazing guy, like great actor, great musician, just really, really interesting guy. He is someone I would like to have met in person.
What what year did you see him play
So
live?
that's also got to be the 80s. I don't think probably mid to late 80s.
maybe on the Rain Dogs tour
Yeah,
or
that's what it would have been.
Frank's Wild Years.
Rain Dogs. I'm pretty sure it's Rain Dogs. Yeah,
Um,
and those are both great albums.
yeah, he's like I said, he's never put out a bad record, and I do know them all. I have them all,
Yeah,
and am quite familiar with all of them. And the last the last one he put out, I think, was 2012, 2013, and I'm assuming he's in some form of retirement at this point because you don't ever hear anything from him anymore. And that was his last studio record. Um, and he's got to be shit late 70s at this point,
definitely.
mid to late 70s.
Yep.
A little anecdote about him. So you said, oh, he's somebody you would like to have met. When I was living in San Francisco, my friends and I were hanging out in Golden Gate Park, playing frisbee or whatever, just hanging out on a sunny afternoon. And sure enough, Tom Waits comes walking by with his brood of kids. I think he had maybe 3, 4 young kids. So this is early 90s. And it was just interesting because he seemed like such a normal guy in that context. And we weren't used to seeing, we were all big fans of his, by the way, at the time. So it's like everybody stops in their tracks and like, that's fucking Tom Waits.
Yeah.
That's Tom Waits. And he's got this brood of what looked like feral children around him, like with, long overgrown hair. And it was just a really interesting sight and interesting dynamic, because I think he was there with what I assume was his wife as well. And you could just sense that he didn't want to be bothered. And like at that point, that was probably the height of his popularity. And in San Francisco, with a bunch of 20 something people, you could just kind of sense that he's like, oh, don't fuck with me now. I'm here with my family, Golden Gate Park on a Sunday afternoon. I don't want to be bothered. And so we did. But it was
And
kind
I
of
think
cool to see
I
him.
I think that was respectful, and I think that was correct. I think you choose your spots. The guy's like standing at a show, watching the band, drinking a beer. You can totally go up to someone and just start, chatting with them. But with their wife and kids, you give them space. You leave them alone. So, but
It,
but but that is cool.
and that was definitely what was emanating from him.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I see you guys. I know you recognize me. Let's just let it be.
The
Um,
funny thing with him is I wonder how many people think of him or know him as an actor and not that much as a musician.
Old farts like you and I do,
Yeah.
because we remember things like Down by Law,
Yeah.
which
And
my top 5 of all time
yeah, I mean
favorite movies.
he's fantastic. Like the movie's great. Okay, the movie is great, but he is so good that like you wouldn't think, oh, this guy's actually really musician first, actor second. So
Um, Even that recent thing on Netflix, that Coen Brothers movie that came out about 5 years ago called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
yeah,
It's like 4 different vignettes throughout the movie, 4 or 5, and Tom Waits is featured in one.
yeah,
So he's done that since
yeah,
he's put out a record. Speaking of him as an actor, and it's a really good segment too. Have you seen that movie?
yeah, and with Tim Blake
Okay,
Nelson, yeah,
yeah, I
um,
really like that a lot.
yeah, me too. I really like the Coen Brothers in general, but yeah, I think that I wouldn't be surprised if he did a couple more films. I would be a little surprised if he put out another album. So, and
Um,
go ahead.
Uh, I also wanted to touch on some other bands or
Yeah,
artists who have had an amazing stretch or string of records. Do you want to keep talking about that still? Because I
yeah,
still have quite a few on my
yeah,
list.
absolutely. And let me just also mention one we already mentioned before when we were first talking about this. But if you go back and listen to other albums, Roxy Music's run stands, with the other bands pretty easily.
Yep,
So, so
I would agree, especially the first 5.
yeah,
The
yeah,
last one being Siren. That
yeah,
was their initial run.
yeah. With
And
For Your
then
Pleasure, yeah,
they took a few years off and came back with, I think it was Manifesto. And there was a couple different band members,
yeah,
but that first run
And if you
that
see them
equals anything.
on the old gray whistle test, their performance is phenomenal. So
Yes, I've seen that.
yeah,
Um, Talking Heads, I think they easily fall into that category of at least six really good records
yeah, they
in a
do. Their
row.
last album was not good. So I don't include them as bands who never put out a good out who never put out a shitty album. But their run otherwise was incredible, and they're definitely one of my all-time favorite bands. So
You're talking about Naked.
yeah,
So I recently picked that up, never really giving it a chance. And I would agree with you. It's not great, but it's better than the one right before it, True Stories.
and
Ugh,
I'm not a big fan of True Stories either, and that's the
ugh.
problem because like their first four albums are so great that then the decline hits. So
Um, I would, I would say their first six.
okay, so
So,
first album is Talking Head 77, then
mm-hmm,
second album is More Songs About Buildings and Food,
mm-hmm,
third album is Fear of Music.
mm-hmm.
Okay, fourth album is Remain in Light, or is
Yep.
yeah, okay. And then fifth album is what was the one
Speaking
with
in tongues,
Speaking Tongues and Burning Down the House? Okay.
and then Little Creatures is the one afterwards.
And Little Creatures is okay. Yeah, I don't think the problem is they set the benchmark so high that Little Creatures I think is okay. It's not a bad album, but it's not a particularly good album because the first four are so good. First five.
I
And they're
would
an
agree.
interesting band because they start off as a quartet, a very stripped down sound. And then by the time they hit, Remain in Light and Speaking in Tongues, it's such a different sound. And so I love that about them.
I saw them live on that tour that, the Stop Making Sense movie.
So did I, yeah.
Yeah, that was very memorable show. That was 1983 at the Seattle Arena. And it was exactly the same show as the Stop
Yep.
Making Sense movie.
So I saw them for that. I saw them a few times. My brother was the one who turned me on to them. He saw them so early. He and Malia, his wife, saw them at the Paradise in Boston, where they were doing two sets and two shows, not two sets, two shows, back to back. And after the first show, the announcer came out and said, "Anyone who wants to stay for the second show, you're welcome to stay," because there just weren't that many people there.
Right.
And so that's when you're seeing a band early.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
it's funny with Stop Making Sense, they're re-releasing it this year. It's because they've redone it and they've production wise. And if you see, you'll see Chris France. Everyone's wearing the same clothes for every song except for Chris France, where they did Stop Making Sense over 3 days. And they were supposed to wear the same clothes for everything to make it look like one
Sure.
concert. And he sent his clothes out to the cleaners and didn't get them back in time. So if you see in some for some of the songs, he's wearing a different colored shirt than another because he didn't get his clothes back in time. So
That actually pretty much ruined the movie for me.
when you found out that it wasn't one concert,
No, that he was wearing different stuff. I,
yes, yeah,
I
that
just
yeah,
can't handle that.
yeah. Then you must have hated it when I emailed you about the song remains the same.
Oh, yes,
They
yes.
had to redo part of that. So um,
Um, another one from the same era as Elvis Costello.
yeah, and now he's put out so many records. I find it hard to believe. I can't name a bad one off the top of my head, but I would find it hard to believe he's never put out a bad album because he's put out so many albums. And he's someone who's changing his sound frequently as well. I love his early albums. The first five, six, up until probably what was after Imperial Bedroom.
Punch the Clock.
That's where it
That's
starts.
starts getting lame.
Yeah.
And his records since then, and he still puts out records every year or two.
Yep.
And I check out most of them, and they're hit and miss. They're yeah, they're not great. Like his first handful of records, which are all in my book just absolute classics. Um,
And
but
he's
he still keeps going, and you know, got to
he,
hand it to him.
one of the best concerts I ever saw. Squeeze opened for Elvis Costello, and I love Squeeze, and they were fantastic. And then he was fantastic. And then they came out for the encore and did From a Whisper to a Scream together, and it was
Mm-hmm.
just a phenomenal show. But yeah, the My Aim Is True, This Year's Model, those first few albums. Like I
Armed
said,
Forces,
yeah, Armed Forces, fantastic album. Um,
Get
uh,
Happy,
yeah, all the way
Taking Liberties,
up in
even
and
Imperial Bedroom.
taking liberties though is was a lot of B-sides or whatever, wasn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was stuff that hadn't. It was singles and B-sides
that's
that
what I
weren't
thought.
on American releases.
Yeah,
But it's still, it's 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 not a compilation per se where it's uh, hits from studio records. So I kind of consider that
and I liked it.
record of, yeah, a normal record, so to speak.
It's funny though because you can tell when you listen to it, or I certainly could even back then, that it wasn't that there was something different. Like it didn't flow like as naturally as Armed Forces or My Aim Is True. But I liked it. You know, and I agree with your definition. Um,
And there's that country record Almost Blue that came out. I think
I
it was
like that.
right before Imperial Bedroom.
Yeah,
That got slagged when it was released.
yeah,
It's a great record.
yeah.
It's
No, I agree.
an very unusual country record, but really, really good in my opinion.
Yeah, no, Tonight the Bottle Let Me Down, one of the songs on there. I really like, yeah, I like that. Just like I like Joe Jackson's Jumping Jive album.
Mhm.
I'm, you know, I'm open to bands changing sounds as long as I like it. You know, when Neil Young did that with Trans or the legendary Pink Dots, like it just didn't work for me. Not because I'm not because I'm so rigid, it just wasn't good in my opinion. So I saw Elvis a few times, and one of the times though, one of my best friend's sister and I slept outside the arena, or not arena, it was a theater for tickets. And this is during the winter in Boston. And they finally opened up, and we're moving up, and we're moving up, and we get to the box office finally, and it was sold out to the people right in front of us. They bought the last
Ah,
tickets. So I was outside the theater for like, I don't know, 8 hours in the freezing
ah,
cold
that's
just to
brutal.
get shut out. Yep. So
And you couldn't find any from a
uh,
scalper or something.
I think we did end up getting scalp tickets for that show. Yeah. So because that was easy to do in those days too. So but you just didn't want to count on it. But you know, but it was certainly easier. One of the nice things back then, paper tickets as opposed to now. You know, it was easier. So
Every music fan around our age, or not every, but a lot of them, like me, has all their ticket stubs from when you used to get paper tickets. Starting, I think the first one for me was probably the Who in 1982, or the Police in 1982 or something, all the way up until, you know, the last few years when they stopped using paper tickets. But I still have them all in a little box.
so you can tell how many concerts you've gone to in your life.
Roughly, yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing. So
yeah. Up until a certain point, and there's probably a few where I lost the stub or whatever, but most of them I have still.
at one of the clubs in Boston, TT the Bears, when you go buy advance tickets, they'll basically write on a napkin or like just a piece of paper, like one or 1+1 or whatever, and they just sign, and that counted. So,
That's
but
certainly old school.
yes, it wouldn't include the band's name or anything. Uh, so like that wouldn't be much of a keeper. Um,
Carrying on with bands who, again, same old shit. REM, I think it falls into that category. Their first six records to me are all very, very good. After that, there's a quick drop off, but I like all of those first six records
so
a
the
lot.
funny thing for me about REM is, so I've complained about other bands where it's the last album, it's naked, it's cut the crap, whatever, where that's where the bands hit the skids. Ironically enough, for me with REM, it's the flip side. I'm not a big fan of Murmur. I'm not a big fan of Reckoning. Then after that, in my opinion, then they hit their stride, and that's when their albums become really good. Up until uh, what was the one with the Sidewinder Sleeps Tonight?
That was Out of Time, I think,
No,
or
it was the one after Out of Time.
um, God, what was the
Okay.
name of that?
So that one, and then the one after that, I think had What's the Frequency, Kenneth, or maybe they were both on that album.
No, but Monster was What's the Frequency, Kenneth? And yeah, they had lost me by
Yeah,
then
and
as
that's what I'm
well.
saying. As a matter of fact, it's the only because it was called "What's the Frequency, Kenneth" that I was willing to listen to it. If it had been "What's the Frequency, Barry," I wouldn't have liked
You know what
it.
that title refers to, don't you?
No.
So I don't know if you remember, but right around that time, the TV news anchor Dan Rather got punched in the face and, just by some random dude who walked up to him and said, "What's the frequency, Kenneth?" and then punched him square in the face. That's where they got the title of that song from.
That's a good trivia question.
Poor Dan Rather,
Yes. Well,
just some insane person and saying some silly non sequitur, and then boom, right in the chops.
that is
It's kind
bizarre.
of a legendary
Yeah, I'm surprised I never
moment.
heard that. So,
Mhm.
um,
But my last, the last record of theirs that I really liked was, I believe it was called Document. Was it Document or the one after that? I guess it was Document.
so
And that was their
fa-
fifth or sixth record.
so it's document, and that's the one that had the one I love. Um, and
Yes,
and so it was Fables of the Reconstruction, the one right before that.
it was two before that.
Okay, and then after document is Out of Time.
Is it Out of Time? No, it was Green. And
Okay,
actually, Green is the last
I,
one I like.
I like Green. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I gotta be honest, I liked Out of Time. Did you not like Out of Time because of all the hype it got?
I fucking hate that record.
And so, what do you dislike about it?
The songs are awful.
Okay,
The
so
music is awful. It's uninteresting, and yeah, I just don't like it at all. And it's not because it was so huge and so popular. That was by far their biggest record
yeah, easily, yeah,
at the time
yeah,
with Losing My Religion. That
yeah,
was all over radio and MTV at the time.
and shiny
Uh,
happy people.
yeah, I not a big fan of either of those songs, but the rest of the record is even worse. And I have given it many chances, and I just despise it.
That's interesting. I like the album. Um, I don't think it's their best album by any means. And I really like Document and I really like Green. As a matter of fact, those would probably be my favorite albums of theirs.
It's funny that you're
Green is
not a big
powerful. Yeah.
you're not a big fan of Murmur or Reckoning, because most hardcore REM fans that I know anyway, they
Yeah.
gravitate towards the earlier
Yes.
stuff, and
Yep.
me being one of those. And in fact, Chronic Town, which was the EP, 4-song EP that came out before Murmur, might even be my favorite thing. But it's between that and Murmur, and yeah, so it's
Stuff like South
interesting that you don't
Central
like that
Rain, I
stuff.
found just to be an annoying song.
Huh.
But as opposed to like later on stuff like Orange Crush, I really liked. I really like It's the End of the World as we know it, and I feel fine.
Hmm.
I like a lot of their later stuff. I saw them a couple times. I was never. If someone said to me, "Do you like REM?" I would have said yes. If someone said, "Are you a huge fan?" I would have said no. I like them, and I definitely like listening to them. I like seeing them in concert, but they're not in my top 20 bands of all time by any means.
Man, my circle of friends and myself worshipped the ground they walked on there for a couple of years, like when Murmur came out and Reckoning. And I'd mentioned to you that if we wanted to see a show, we would have to drive 250 miles up to Seattle. And we did that numerous times for REM, the first time being in 1984 it was on the Reckoning tour. So really early REM. And yeah, I don't know if I've ever loved a band more than them
They
during
they had
that
that sort of
heyday.
falling back then. I remember the band Pylon getting a lot of attention just because they were friends with REM.
Hmm.
uh,
REM worshipped Pylon.
yeah, and so a lot of people were like, if you're an REM fan, like, oh, okay, then I have an obligation to like Pylon. But uh,
Pylon, what a stupid name.
not a
But they're
particularly
good.
interesting band.
Pylon's good.
They're all right. But and again, if I'm not a big fan of early REM, I'm obviously not going to be a big fan of Pylon. But it was interesting. They did have that. Like, I'm not surprised that you and your friends felt that way because they definitely had that strong of a bigger than cult following, but not worldwide following at that time. So
Oh yeah, they were playing theaters like
Yeah.
1,000 to 3,000 people. It was getting larger each year. I think we went up to Seattle about 3 or 4 years in a row to see them, and each year it'd be at a bigger place as
And
they were getting more and more popular.
that was the funny thing about the Police. Unfortunately, I did not see the Police at the Rat, which is a super small club in Boston that you probably have heard of. But I saw them at the Orpheum, which holds, I don't know, 2,000, 2,500 the first time I saw them. And by the last time I saw them, they were playing in Boston Garden, to, 20,000 people, and then they played to like, much larger crowds after that, but I was done with them. But it's funny when a band does that. So,
It's the natural progression
yeah.
of bands, or at least it was back then. And um, to your point, the last time I saw the Police, it was at the Tacoma Dome.
Yeah. And so I mean, it must be weird when you're that band, when you start off playing in these small clubs to like, no one, or even to like a devoted audience, but it's a very small audience. And then once you're playing for like 100,000 people, it must be just so strange.
Mm.
So, um,
Another one I would put into this category is, and these are all going back to like the early 80s, late 70s. U2, their first six records, I think, are all
and
very, very strong.
I'll disagree with that. I really like Boy. I like October. The next album is
War,
War.
War,
I
yeah.
like War. I'm sick of it. I mean, it got so much radio play that like if I ever hear New Year's Day again, I'll blow my brains out. Uh, um,
You gotta. I'm looking back at this stuff in the
yes,
context
yeah,
of when I initially loved it.
yep, and I understand that. And I did like War. I really did. What was the album after that?
Unforgettable Fire.
Unforgettable Fire was good. Is Joshua Tree the one after that?
Yep,
I did not like that album. I did not like that album at all.
that's where they lost you.
Yeah. And so, and I was never, I really liked Boy, and I liked the albums after that, but I was never like a huge U2 fan. I actually saw them for Boy. And that was great.
Was that at the Paradise in Boston?
That was at Metro. So there were two,
What
there were two clubs in Lansdowne Street, Spit, which is the smaller one, and then Metro. Actually, Spit became Axis, and there was Axis in Metro. So the question was the band playing at Axis or they played at Metro? And so like Axis was I don't know 500 people, and Metro was like 3,000 or 2,000. So, um,
that
but
must have been around 1980.
yeah, and so that's when I was so the